courtroom was unnervingly silent, thick with a palpable tension, as 5-year-old Lyra Dawson stepped through the heavy wooden doors. Her tiny hand clutched the leash of Argus, a majestic German shepherd with a long, jagged scar running along his left side. Every eye in the room, from the jury box to the rows of anxious reporters, followed the small girl as she made her hesitant, yet undeniably determined way toward the witness stand. Judge Gareth Finch, a seasoned man with decades of legal experience etched into his features, leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp and contemplative as he observed the child. He knew, with a heavy certainty, that the entire weight of this high-stakes case rested squarely on her fragile shoulders. Lyra was the sole witness to an attempted abduction, a case that, if won, could put a dangerous man, a predator who had terrorized families for years, behind bars for life. But there was one critical problem. Lyra hadn't uttered a single word since the traumatic incident. Across the courtroom, Victor Thorne sat at the defense table, his expression composed, even a touch smug. A 45-year-old architect with an unremarkable appearance, Thorne had been arrested after an eyewitness placed him at the scene of Lyra's attempted abduction. However, his defense was seemingly solid: no direct physical evidence, no confession, and, crucially, a witness who couldn't verbally testify. His shrewd lawyer had already crafted a meticulous strategy, one that hinged entirely on discrediting the traumatized child's ability to identify him. But then, something utterly unexpected happened. As Lyra settled into the witness chair, her wide, emerald eyes met Victor Thorne's. Her small fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as they made a subtle movement, a slight twitch that was barely noticeable to the untrained eye. It was a silent signal, a coded plea she had learned over weeks of intensive therapy. Only two beings in the room caught it: Argus and Judge Gareth Finch. Argus's reaction was immediate, visceral. The moment Lyra's fingers twitched in that silent plea for help, the dog's powerful body went rigid. His ears pricked forward with an almost human alertness, his muscles coiling like a loaded spring ready to unleash. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within his chest, a sound of profound warning, of unmistakable recognition. His golden, brown eyes locked onto Thorne, unwavering and piercing, filled with an ancient, primal certainty. The intensity of Argus's reaction sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. A murmur spread through the spectators, whispers of speculation filling the air. There was something about the dog's behavior that struck a profound chord. This wasn't just a well-trained support animal reacting to his handler's distress. This was something deeper, something primal, an instinctual alarm. Judge Gareth Finch's hand came down hard on the gavel, the sharp crack echoing like thunder through the suddenly hushed room. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," he declared, his voice unusually urgent, almost strained. Prosecutor Eleanor Vance shot him a questioning look, but he didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he glanced at Lyra, who clung to Argus like a lifeline, her small face buried in the dog's thick fur. Something profoundly significant had just happened, and he needed to understand exactly what it was before the trial could possibly proceed any further. As the courtroom emptied, Finch remained seated, his mind racing. He had witnessed countless things in his years on the bench, but never had a therapy dog reacted with such undeniable certainty, such raw conviction. What had Argus recognized? And, more importantly, what did that mean for the fate of this critical case? Outside in the bustling hallway, Lyra knelt beside Argus, her tiny hands gripping his fur tightly. Her mother, Celeste Dawson, bent down beside her, smoothing back the child's curly blonde hair with trembling fingers. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Lyra didn't respond, didn't need to. Her grip on Argus tightened, her small frame pressing into his side as if drawing comfort and strength. Detective Julian Price, the lead investigator on the case, watched from a few steps away. A grizzled FBI agent with decades of experience hunting shadows, Price had a gut instinct that had served him remarkably well over the years, and right now, his gut told him that whatever had just transpired in that courtroom was a game changer. He stepped closer to Judge Finch. "Something spooked that dog," he murmured, his voice low and gravelly. "I'd bet my badge he recognizes Thorne from somewhere." Finch exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Then we need to find out where." Meanwhile, inside the defense's private room, Victor Thorne sat across from his attorney, Marcus Blackwood. The moment they were alone, the smug confidence on Thorne's face twisted into something else, something colder, more calculating. His fingers drummed rhythmically against the table as he replayed the moment in his mind. The girl hadn't spoken, but the dog had reacted. "She knows," he muttered under his breath, a sliver of panic in his voice. Blackwood raised an eyebrow, quizzical. "What?" Thorne forced a small, strained smile. "Nothing," he said, but his mind was already racing, frantically. That damn dog. He hadn't considered the animal would pose such a problem. But now he realized Argus might just be the key to unraveling everything he had so carefully constructed. As the 15-minute recess neared its end, Judge Gareth Finch straightened his robes and took a deep, fortifying breath. He didn't believe in coincidences, and right now, something told him that Argus had just given them the most important clue of the entire trial. It was time to dig deeper, to push the boundaries of what was expected, and for the first time since the case had begun, he felt the tide undeniably shifting. A voice returns the journey of trust before the chilling silence, before the imposing courtroom, before the terror that stole her innocent voice. Lyra Dawson was a vibrant, endless chatterbox of a child. At 5 years old, she was the kind of girl who could fill any room with boundless stories and infectious laughter, her bright blue eyes gleaming with insatiable curiosity and playful mischief. She loved fairy tales about princesses and knights, her collection of fluffy stuffed animals, and especially the way her mother read bedtime stories with different, funny voices for each character. She had never truly known fear until that fateful afternoon. It had been a perfect spring day, the kind where the sweet scent of blooming honeysuckle and jasmine drifted through the air, and the warm afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the spacious backyard. Celeste Dawson had been watching her daughter from the kitchen window, a soft smile tugging at the corner of her lips as Lyra twirled in the yard, her pink floral dress flaring like a tiny dancer's. Thomas Dawson, Lyra's father, was due home in a few hours, and Celeste had been debating whether to start dinner or wait for him. It should have been an ordinary afternoon. It should have been safe. At precisely 3:42 p.m., Celeste's phone rang. It was her sister calling from out of state, and she stepped inside for what she thought would be a quick, casual conversation. 4 minutes. That was all it took. When she returned to the yard, the small iron gate stood ajar, an ominous sign. A wave of ice, cold terror shot through her veins, freezing her blood. Her breath caught in her throat as she frantically scanned the space where her daughter had been. Lyra was still there, but she wasn't alone. A nondescript black van idled near the curb, its side door slightly ajar, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. A man knelt beside Lyra, his smile unnervingly warm, too inviting. "I have puppies in my van," he was saying, his voice smooth, practiced, almost hypnotic. "Special ones, they need a little girl to take care of them. Would you like to see?" Celeste's world seemed to slow down, her instincts screaming in primal alarm before her mind could even process what was happening. Her voice sharp as a knife. "Slice through the air, Lyra!" The man's head snapped up, his smile vanishing instantly, replaced by something sharp, calculating, and utterly sinister. In an instant, he lunged and grabbed Lyra's arm. Lyra froze. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She only stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, as if some deep-rooted ancient fear had locked her in place, binding her to the spot. Across the street, Helen Carter, a retired kindergarten teacher walking her terrier, saw everything unfold. Her voice, weathered with age but strong with unwavering conviction, rang out like a bell. "Hey, get away from that child!" The man hesitated, his grip momentarily loosened for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. Lyra, with a burst of surprising strength, yanked her arm free and bolted toward her mother. Celeste scooped her daughter into her arms, just as the van's engine roared to life, a monstrous sound. The tires screamed against the pavement as the vehicle sped away, leaving black streaks of rubber on the road, a terrifying reminder of what nearly happened. Celeste clutched Lyra tightly, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. But Lyra didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She only buried her face into her mother's shoulder and trembled uncontrollably. The police arrived within minutes. Detective Julian Price, A seasoned investigator from the FBI's Child Abduction Task Force took immediate control of the chaotic scene. His graying hair and sharp brown eyes spoke of countless years spent chasing shadows, searching for missing children who were often never found. He had seen this pattern before, too many times. He fits the profile, Price muttered, flipping through a worn notebook. 5 children have disappeared in the last 24 months, all approached near their homes, all lured by promises of puppies or special toys. His partner, Agent Sarah Reynolds, knelt beside Lyra, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, do you remember what the man looked like?" Silence. Celeste brushed Lyra's hair back, her hands trembling. "Honey, it's okay. You're safe now. Can you tell the nice officer what he looked like?" Lyra's small hands gripped her mother's sweater tightly, but she didn't speak. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, shutting her voice off completely, plunging her into a world of mute fear. "She hasn't said a word since I picked her up," Celeste whispered, fear creeping into her voice, a chilling dread. "She just won't talk." Agent Sarah Reynolds exchanged a knowing look with Price. "Selective mutism," she murmured. "A severe trauma response." Price sighed, rubbing his temple. "Without a clear statement, we don't have much to go on. The description is vague. A man, a black van. It could be anyone." Helen Carter, who had witnessed the abduction attempt, stepped forward. "I got part of the license plate," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "The first 3 letters. YKZ." Price's gaze snapped to her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "That's something." Celeste, still clutching Lyra, felt a surge of helplessness. Her daughter, once so full of life and laughter, had retreated deep within herself, and in the days that followed it only got worse. Lyra stopped playing. She stopped drawing. She refused to leave the house, flinching at the sight of passing cars. She barely slept, and when she did, her nights were filled with silent nightmares, her small body thrashing against invisible threats. Her screams never came, only gasps of terror that woke her parents in the dead of night, leaving them feeling just as helpless. Celeste and Thomas tried everything, endless story times. Her favorite comfort foods, her beloved stuffed bunny. Nothing worked. The child they knew was slipping further and further away, lost in a silent world of fear. One evening, Celeste sat across from Thomas at the kitchen table, her eyes hollow from exhaustion. The therapist recommended a support animal, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "A therapy dog." Thomas ran a tired hand through his hair. "Do you really think that'll help?" "I don't know," Celeste admitted, her voice laced with desperation. "But I'm willing to try anything." Neither of them could have known how much that single decision would change everything. Because while Lyra had lost her voice, there was someone who could still hear her, and his name was Argus. The bond, a warmth of loyalty, the air inside Dr. Clara Hayes's Animal Rehabilitation Center was thick with the clean scent of antiseptic and the earthy musk of dog fur. The spacious room was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock and the occasional soft scratch of claws against the tiled floor. On a large, orthopedic bed near the window, a German shepherd lay perfectly still, his deep brown eyes tracking every movement with quiet, intelligent intensity. His name was Argus. Once, he had been one of the finest canine officers in the city's police force, a dog whose remarkable instincts and rigorous training had saved countless lives in dangerous situations. But now, he bore the indelible scars of sacrifice, one particularly jagged, prominent mark running down his right flank, a permanent reminder of the night that had abruptly ended his distinguished career. 3 years ago, during a daring raid to rescue a kidnapped child, Argus had lunged at an armed suspect without a moment's hesitation. The man had lashed out at him with a knife, a blow meant for an officer, cutting deep into his flesh. Argus, despite the searing pain, had subdued the suspect even as his own blood darkened his fur. But in the months that followed, the severe injury never fully healed. His mobility was affected, and the department, already strapped for funds, made the difficult decision to retire him. He had been placed on a euthanasia list, deemed unfit for further service, his fate sealed. That was before Clara stepped in. Dr. Hayes had been running her highly respected therapy animal program for years, specializing in cases where animals could provide profound comfort and aid to trauma survivors. When she heard about Argus's case, she fought tirelessly to adopt him, convinced that his sharp mind and unwavering loyalty still held immense value, that he had more to give. And now she was about to put that belief to the ultimate test. Celeste Dawson sat nervously in a chair, her fingers gripping the fabric of her skirt, her heart pounding. Lyra stood behind her, peeking out shyly from behind her mother's shoulder. The little girl had refused to speak since the incident 2 weeks ago, and though she had attended several therapy sessions, nothing had yet coaxed a single word from her. Clara knelt to Lyra's level, her voice gentle and reassuring. My name is Clara. I work with very special dogs that help kids who have been through scary things. Lyra said nothing, her emerald eyes flickering to the large German shepherd a few feet away. Argus sat patiently, his ears perked forward, but he didn't move toward her. He simply watched, his presence steady, calm, and utterly unthreatening. Would you like to meet him? Clara asked, her voice soft. The little girl didn't answer, but she didn't run either. That in itself was a significant start. Celeste gently smoothed her daughter's hair. He's a very nice dog, sweetheart. He used to be a police dog, just like the ones in your storybooks. Clara gestured to Argus and gave a quiet, firm command. Stay. The German shepherd didn't so much as twitch a muscle. Clara turned back to Lyra. You don't have to come close if you don't want to. Argus will wait right here. But if you feel ready, you can put out your hand and he'll come to you. Lyra hesitated for long, agonizing moments. She remained frozen in place, a tiny statue of fear. Then, inch by painstaking inch, she stepped out from behind her mother, her tiny hand lifting, hesitant but deliberate. Argus remained perfectly still, waiting for the final, unspoken cue. When Clara nodded almost imperceptibly, he slowly lowered his head and took a careful step forward. Then another and another, his movements gentle and deliberate. The moment his warm breath touched Lyra's palm, something profound shifted. Lyra's fingers curled slightly, tentatively brushing through the dog's thick, coarse fur. The connection was made. Celeste gasped softly, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time Lyra had reached out to anything or anyone since the attack, the first sign of breaking through the impenetrable wall of silence. Tears streamed down Celeste's face as she whispered, "Oh, my baby." Lyra's small fingers burrowed deeper into Argus's fur, gripping him as if he were the only solid, certain thing in a world that had turned terrifyingly uncertain. Clara smiled, a warm, hopeful smile. "That's a good girl, Lyra. Argus likes you." The child said nothing, but she didn't let go. Over the next few weeks, Argus and Lyra became inseparable, a constant, comforting presence in each other's lives. At home, she would sit beside him for hours, her tiny hands tracing the ragged scar along his side, a silent acknowledgement of his bravery. When nightmares woke her in the middle of the night, it was Argus's steady heartbeat, his warm, breathing presence, that calmed her, pulling her back from the abyss of fear. Though she still refused to speak, she began drawing again, simple crayon pictures of a girl and a dog standing together against shadowy figures, a visual representation of her trauma and her newfound protector. One afternoon, while sitting on the floor of Clara's office, Lyra was watching Argus perform a simple, elegant trick when something truly remarkable happened. "Good boy," she whispered. The words were so soft, so fragile, that for a moment, Celeste thought she had imagined them. But when she turned, she saw Lyra staring at Argus, her lips slightly parted in wonder, as if she too had surprised herself. Tears filled Celeste's eyes, a torrent of relief and hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a faint spark in the darkness. Clara placed a gentle hand on Celeste's arm. "She trusts him," she murmured, her voice filled with quiet understanding. "Sometimes, trust is the very first step toward finding your voice again." Celeste squeezed her hand tightly. "Then we'll follow wherever that trust leads." And it would lead them somewhere they never expected, a courtroom where a monster would finally be unmasked by a truth that transcended words. The verdict, truth unveiled, the air inside the courtroom was thick with an almost unbearable tension, a heavy silence punctuated only by nervous coughs and rustling clothes. The gallery seats were packed to capacity with journalists, anxious families, and legal observers, all watching with bated anticipation as one of the most Profile trials in recent memory was about to resume. In the center of the room, the defendant, Victor Thorne, sat beside his attorney, his expression unreadable, disturbingly calm despite the immense weight of the charges against him. His fingers tapped rhythmically, almost insolently, against the polished wood of the defense table, a telltale sign of his underlying tension. Seated beside her mother, Lyra Dawson clutched Argus's leash tightly, her small fingers wrapped around the thick fabric as if it were a lifeline, her only anchor in the swirling storm of the trial. The German shepherd sat alert beside her, his ears pricked forward, his deep brown eyes locked onto Thorne with an unnerving intensity. Every so often, his nose would twitch as if scenting something familiar, something that only he could perceive in the charged atmosphere.
"All rise!"
The bailiff's voice boomed through the chamber as Judge Gareth Finch entered, his black robe flowing behind him. He took his seat at the elevated bench, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling briefly, meaningfully, on Lyra and Argus. He had already made a controversial ruling, allowing the therapy dog to be present, but he knew that decision was far from universally accepted. "Before we proceed with opening statements," Finch said, his deep voice measured and controlled, "the court will hear arguments regarding the presence of the support animal in these proceedings." Marcus Blackwood, the defense attorney, rose smoothly from his seat and adjusted his tie, his movements precise and practiced. "Your Honor," he began, his tone polite but firm, resonating with a confident legal cadence, "while we understand the prosecution's argument for emotional support, the presence of this animal is highly prejudicial. A large German shepherd in the courtroom may evoke an emotional response from the jury that could unfairly bias them against my client. We respectfully request that the dog be removed during testimony." Eleanor Vance, the lead prosecutor, stood immediately in response, her stance unwavering. "Your Honor, Lyra Dawson is 5 years old and a severe trauma survivor. She has been diagnosed with selective mutism as a direct result of her horrific experience. Argus is not here as a spectacle. He is here as a medically necessary support animal, vital for her well-being. His presence allows Lyra to participate in these proceedings without undue distress, which is crucial for justice to be served." Judge Gareth Finch sat back, his expression unreadable, considering the arguments. "I have already reviewed the extensive documentation submitted by the child psychologist and the animal behaviorist. The dog remains." A murmur spread through the courtroom, some in agreement, others grumbling under their breath. Blackwood pressed his lips together, displeased but unwilling to argue further. He returned to his seat, shooting a quick, frustrated glance at Thorne, who remained eerily expressionless. The trial began in earnest, a grim tableau of legal proceedings. The prosecution painted a chilling, detailed picture of Thorne's actions, a meticulously planned pattern of manipulation, deception, and predatory behavior spanning years, targeting vulnerable children. Witnesses were called, including the elderly neighbor, Helen Carter, who recounted in harrowing detail the terrifying moment she saw Thorne trying to lure Lyra into his van. Her voice trembled with emotion, but remained strong with conviction as she described the way he had roughly grabbed the child's arm before fleeing when confronted. Lyra sat silently through it all, her small frame dwarfed by the large wooden chair, a silent testament to her trauma. Her fingers occasionally flexed around Argus's leash, but she never let go. Whenever the tension became too much, she would look down at Argus, who remained perfectly still, his quiet, unwavering presence grounding her. Then it was time for her testimony. A hushed, almost reverent silence fell over the courtroom as Lyra was gently led to the witness stand. Celeste Dawson walked with her, her protective gaze never leaving her daughter. She helped Lyra into the seat before stepping away, though her every muscle was taut with the desire to scoop her daughter into her arms and take her far, far from this place. Eleanor Vance approached carefully, her demeanor soft and warm, her eyes conveying empathy. "Hi, Lyra," she said with a gentle, encouraging smile. "I know this is a little scary, but remember, you don't have to say anything you don't want to. You can just nod or shake your head if you feel more comfortable. And if you ever need a break, you can just let us know." Lyra didn't look at her, her gaze fixed on the table, her breathing shallow. But then, as if sensing her unease, Argus pressed his body lightly against her leg, a comforting weight. She reached down and gripped a handful of his fur, finding solace. Slowly, she nodded. "Good," Vance said, keeping her voice light, guiding her gently. "Lyra, can you tell us who was with you in your yard that day?" Lyra hesitated, a long, agonizing moment of silence. She didn't lift her head, but after what felt like an eternity, she slowly raised her small arm and pointed directly at Victor Thorne. The defendant's expression didn't outwardly change, but something almost imperceptible flickered in his eyes, a brief, involuntary tightening of his jaw, a momentary loss of his carefully constructed composure. Blackwood immediately stood, his voice rising in protest. "Objection! The child has been repeatedly shown images of my client prior to trial. This identification is unreliable, Your Honor." Judge Gareth Finch held up a hand, silencing him. "Overruled. The jury will determine the credibility of the witness." Vance continued, her voice gaining strength. "Lyra, did this man say anything to you that day?" The child didn't speak. Instead, she made a small, subtle movement with her hand, a unique sign. It was the same signal she had given before, the one that Argus understood. The German shepherd responded instantly. His ears snapped forward, his powerful muscles tensed, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled from his chest. It wasn't an aggressive growl, it was a warning, a profound sound of recognition and disapproval. The reaction sent a shockwave through the courtroom, a ripple of collective unease. Even Judge Gareth Finch sat forward, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. Blackwood stood again, this time more urgently, his voice laced with desperation. "Your Honor, I object! This is theatrics," a cheap ploy to manipulate the jury. But Finch wasn't listening to Blackwood. He was watching Argus. The dog had gone utterly still, his entire focus locked onto Thorne, as if recognizing a scent, a psychic vibration that only he could perceive. It was the exact same reaction he had exhibited when Lyra first saw Thorne, the same instant, instinctual response. A thought struck Finch then, a flash of insight. He turned to Eleanor Vance. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice carefully measured, deliberate. "Has this animal had any prior interaction with the defendant?" Vance hesitated, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Not to my knowledge, Your Honor." Finch turned to the defense table. "Mr. Thorne, have you encountered this dog before?" For the very first time, Thorne showed real, unfiltered emotion. His fingers, which had been tapping so calmly earlier, now clenched into a white, knuckled fist. He remained silent, unable to speak. Then, Eleanor Vance's eyes widened as a sudden, chilling realization hit her, a connection that clicked into place. She turned to her co-counsel and whispered something quickly, urgently. A second later, a member of the prosecution team rushed out of the courtroom, a new energy in their movements. "What is going on?" Blackwood demanded, his patience thinning, a growing sense of dread in his voice. Vance straightened, her expression now unreadable, determined. "Your Honor, I request a short recess. There may be new evidence relevant to this case, evidence that could prove decisive." Judge Gareth Finch studied her for a long moment, sensing the gravity of her statement, before nodding. 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, whispers filled the air, a flurry of excited speculation. Had Argus just recognized Victor Thorne? And if so, from where? Something told Judge Gareth Finch that the answer to that question would change everything, irrevocably altering the course of the trial. Discovery and confession. The truth unveiled, the weight of the case bore down heavily on the prosecution team as new, groundbreaking developments surfaced. Victor Thorne had now been officially linked to multiple disappearances, a chilling pattern of predatory behavior. Yet, without Lyra's full, verbal testimony, the trial still teetered on the very edge of uncertainty. What no one expected, however, was that the key to unraveling the entire, gruesome case would not come from the traumatized child, but from the loyal German shepherd who never left her side. The morning was crisp, the air charged with anticipation, as the prosecution team, led by Eleanor Vance, presented their next motion to introduce new, crucial forensic evidence. The soil samples found meticulously embedded in the undercarriage of Victor Thorne's black van had been analyzed, and the results pointed to a very specific, remote location: a desolate, long-abandoned cabin nestled deep within the northern woods. Detective Julian Price having worked on similar cold cases for decades, knew precisely what this could mean: a potential hiding place, a grim revelation. "Your Honor," Vance addressed Judge Gareth Finch, her voice firm and resolute. "We request a 24-hour recess to follow up on a crucial lead. We firmly believe this evidence may provide the final, irrefutable piece needed to close this horrific case." A Marcus Blackwood, Thorne's defense attorney, immediately objected, his voice rising in indignation. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than a blatant delay tactic. My client has already been subjected to extensive questioning and invasive procedures, and there is no solid, direct evidence tying him to this so-called cabin. Soil samples are circumstantial at best, a flimsy excuse." Judge Finch's stern gaze silenced Blackwood, his authority unquestionable. Motion granted. He ruled with finality. "The prosecution has 24 hours. Court adjourned. As soon as the judge's gavel struck, Price and his team mobilized with lightning speed. Argus, Lyra's ever watchful protector, was brought along for the operation. His unmistakable reaction to Thorne in the courtroom had been too powerful to ignore. Perhaps he could sense something, a residual fear or a specific scent, that human eyes and instruments had missed. The search team arrived at the desolate cabin by early afternoon. The place was eerily silent, the surrounding pine trees whispering with the wind, a lonely, haunting sound. A thick layer of dust covered the creaking porch, yet faint, fresh footprints leading toward the back door suggested recent, clandestine activity. Argus was the first to react, and his response was immediate and intense. As soon as they approached the cabin, the dog's ears perked, his powerful nose twitching with keen intensity. Analyzing the air, his body stiffened, tail held erect, muscles poised like a coiled spring. He let out a low, ominous growl, pacing anxiously at the threshold, a clear sign of profound unease. "This place is wrong," Price murmured, his voice low and grim. "Argus knows something's here, something bad." The team proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn, every sense heightened. Inside, the cabin was sparse, unsettling in its emptiness: a crude wooden table, a rusty cot, empty food cans haphazardly stacked in a dusty corner. But then, Price noticed something peculiar. The worn wooden floorboards near the back wall had an unnatural seam, a faint indentation that seemed utterly out of place. He knocked on it, hollow. "There's something under here," he said, his voice hushed but urgent. With swift, precise action, the officers pried the boards loose. What lay beneath sent a shiver down their spines, a cold dread, a narrow, spiraling staircase leading down into a hidden basement, a dark secret concealed beneath the earth. The air grew cold and damp as they descended, the dim light from their flashlights revealing a horrific sight: children's belongings, old, discarded toys, small, worn shoes, a faded pink backpack scattered across the dirt floor, and in the farthest corner, chained but miraculously still alive, was a girl. Chloe Miller, the 8-year-old, had been missing for 6 long, agonizing months. Her face was pale, gaunt, her clothes ragged and soiled, but the moment she saw the officers, her eyes filled with a rush of tears, tears of recognition and overwhelming relief. "Helpla," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse, barely a sound. Argus reacted immediately, straining violently against his leash, whining piteously as if sensing the profound suffering this child had endured. Price rushed forward, his heart aching, quickly unlocking the heavy chains and gently scooping Chloe into his arms. "You're safe now," he assured her, his voice thick with emotion. "We've got you, Chloe." Chloe clung to him, her frail body trembling uncontrollably. The long, agonizing search had finally come to an end, but the nightmare for her and countless others wasn't over yet. The climax and justice, the unbreakable bond back at the courthouse. The news of Chloe Miller's miraculous rescue spread like wildfire, igniting a frenzy of media attention and public outrage. The gallery was packed to overflowing as Eleanor Vance prepared for the final, decisive strike against Victor Thorne. Judge Gareth Finch allowed Chloe's discovery to be introduced as powerful new evidence, along with the irrefutable soil samples linking the cabin directly to Victor Thorne's vehicle. "Mr. Thorne," Vance addressed the defendant, her voice sharp as steel, cutting through the tense silence. "How do you explain the presence of an abducted child, locked in a basement on a property tied directly to you?" For the very first time, Victor Thorne looked genuinely shaken, his carefully constructed facade cracking under the immense pressure. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, a tremor in his voice. Eleanor Vance pressed forward, her tone unwavering, relentless. "Your DNA was found on the chains that bound her. Your vehicle's tires match the distinct tracks outside that cabin. And more importantly, Chloe Miller is alive, meaning she can testify against you, she can tell the court everything." The sheer weight of those words, the undeniable truth they carried, settled like a crushing burden over the courtroom. A single survivor meant a living witness, a voice that could single-handedly dismantle his entire meticulously crafted defense. Victor Thorne's carefully constructed composure began to crumble, rapidly. His lawyer, Marcus Blackwood, whispered furiously in his ear, his face grim, but it was clear to everyone that Victor Thorne was cornered, trapped with no escape, and then it happened again, a final, decisive moment. Argus, who had been lying silently at Lyra's feet, suddenly lifted his head, his eyes narrowing at Victor Thorne with a fierce intensity. His hackles rose, a deep, resonant growl vibrating through his chest, filling the tense silence. The room went utterly still as the German shepherd took slow, deliberate steps forward, his gaze locked onto the defendant, an unyielding stare. It was a look of pure, unadulterated recognition, a primal judgment. Victor Thorne flinched visibly. Everyone in the courtroom saw it. The man who had maintained his arrogant composure throughout the trial was now visibly sweating, his hands gripping the edge of the table, trembling uncontrollably. He turned to his attorney, muttering something frantically, desperately. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, a sound of utter defeat, he said, "I want to change my plea." Gasps erupted across the room, a collective shock. Judge Gareth Finch's gaze darkened, his eyes piercing. "Mr. Thorne, are you stating that you wish to plead guilty?" The room held its collective breath, hanging on his every word. Victor Thorne exhaled shakily, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "Yes," he mumbled, his confession echoing through the stunned silence. The trial's abrupt and dramatic end sent shock waves through the nation. Victor Thorne was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his conviction sealing the fate of a man who had terrorized families and destroyed lives for years. But the true heroes of the case weren't just the brilliant lawyers or the relentless detectives. It was a 5-year-old girl who had found her extraordinary courage in the face of terror, and a loyal dog who had never given up on her, standing by her side through every silent, trembling moment. In the days following the sentencing, Lyra spoke her first words in weeks. Holding Argus's face in her small hands, her voice soft but clear, she whispered, "Thank you." Her parents wept, tears of profound relief and overwhelming joy, knowing that their daughter was finally, truly, finding her way back to them, back to herself. And as Argus wagged his tail, nuzzling her gently, it was clear that some bonds were unbreakable, forged in the fires of adversity. No matter how dark the world became, there would always be those willing to stand against the darkness, even if they walked on 4 legs.
Thanks for watching until the end of the video. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of my next videos. See you in the next ones.